processes and activities that are affecting all of our organs, our cells, our entire nervous system. You'll often hear someone say, I'm stressed out, I'm under a lot of stress. And they'll say those words subconsciously, categorizing stress as like a behavioral situation or behavioral issue, not recognizing that it's a physiological condition, a physiological state that has deadly consequences. For many years, I would go to my primary care physician and she would ask me, her first questions were always, what did I do for a living? How was work? Was I having any stress? And I would sit there and I would think, what does this have to do? What does my job or stress have to do with why I'm here to see you for a physical, or why I'm here to see you because of a cold that I'm having? And it turns out that stress has a lot to do with why we're in the doctor's offices, why we need medical care. And so you'll see here, one definition of stress is the brain and the body's response to an internal or external threat. To put it really simply, stress is your body's reaction to the demands of life. For our brains, specifically our amygdala, which I'll talk a little bit about, that amygdala activates our body's stress response, that fight or flight. So for the amygdala, the demands of life, a paper due, have to pick kids up from school or have to do the remote learning, but the internet keeps, clonking out. Those are all considered perceived threats. A threat is something that scares us, challenges us, something that we feel we're not prepared for. All of those are perceived threats to the amygdala that activates the body's fight or flight. We also know that stress is on a continuum from mild and temporary to chronic and extreme. So there are some benefits to stress. Stress can be a motivator. It can motivate you to action. It could be a signal to you that you need to make changes in your life or lifestyle. There are people who feel most energized and productive when they're under stress. They feel they're able to focus and get things accomplished when they're under pressure or stress. However, what's really happening is a physiological response to the stress and the production of adrenaline and cortisol. And to the brain, that work assignment, that paper, it's a threat triggering the release of adrenaline that's giving you a surge of energy to get the work done. But you'll see when I talk about the brain that if you're one that always operates under stress, that you feel that you can only be productive when it's a tight deadline or you're under pressure, you're one that procrastinates and you wait and you just, stress is what's going to mobilize you and motivate you. What you're doing is also conditioning your body to depend on adrenaline, which over time can be harmful to your body unless you're giving yourself breaks and taking steps to discharge the adrenaline. So again, stress is a part of life. Stress is physiological. Stress can originate internally, meaning your thoughts, your beliefs, your emotions. It can also originate externally, as I mentioned, conditions in your environment, in the world. All of those are stressors. I also want to talk about a specific form of stress, which is burnout. Burnout is considered a chronic form of stress or a prolonged form of stress. And burnout is described as physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion as a result of that prolonged stress or frustration. We often hear about burnout in the context of the workplace, yet burnout can happen as a student, as a parent, as a caregiver. If you're taking care of aging parents or family members with a chronic disease or illness or disability, that could cause burnout. And we also understand whatever the causes of burnout, there's some common or central features, and that is that burnout results when resources feel and look and seem limited, the workload feels unmanageable, and the expectations of you feel unrealistic. So what does burnout look like? How does it show up? How does this form of stress show up for us? exhaustion, feeling drained emotionally, physically, mentally, feeling depleted as if you have nothing you can give. Even with a full night of sleep, you still find yourself dragging through the day. You find it difficult to concentrate, finding yourself irritable, quick-tempered, always frustrated. It's also important to note that sometimes that frustration and irritability is misdirected or misplaced. You don't take it out on your boss, but you take it out at home or with your friends. You find yourself cynical and negative, even resentful of the work that you have to do or what's happening at home. You lose interest, things that you once enjoyed and you got satisfaction from, you don't anymore. You feel trapped. You feel like there's no way of escape. And finally, your productivity declines and you find yourself making mistakes. The risk factors for burnout include feeling isolated, being isolated, feeling unsupported, and having limited resources. Now, many of these symptoms can also indicate depression. So how can you tell the difference? Number one, by seeking help, by speaking to a doctor or a mental health practitioner. Depression is a clinical disorder that requires a diagnosis by a mental health practitioner. It's not something you can just diagnose. You can feel depressed, but to say that you are suffering from depression requires a diagnosis. And the other thing when it comes to burnout is that it's most often the result of something you're doing or something you've been experiencing for a prolonged period of time. So you're not necessarily going to start a new job and on the first day, you're going to say, I'm burnt out. However, over time, the prolonged stress of the job and the workload that's unrelenting takes a physiological toll on your body, and you may find yourself experiencing all the things that you see here. Okay. So let's talk about trauma and what we understand about trauma, specifically traumatic stress. So trauma, what we understand trauma to be is a response to an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances that are experienced by the individual as physically and or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. A definition I like to give to my clients, particularly my children, the clients I work with who are children or teenagers, I like to say that traumas are things, situations or experiences that make us fear for our lives, our bodies, or our sanity. And trauma is an extreme form of stress that overwhelms a person's capacity to cope. And you'll see there that 70% of adults in the US have experienced at least one trauma in their lifetime. The prevalence by gender of trauma is 6 out of 10 men and 5 out of 10 women. And let me also just state that there is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is also a clinically diagnosed disorder. What I'm discussing today is not the diagnosis of PTSD, though PTSD arises from the effects of trauma. However, not everyone who experiences a trauma gets PTSD. So I just wanted to make sure I said that. So what are some common trauma reactions? What we can see when it comes to the experiences of trauma in the aftermath are physiological reactions that can include fatigue, hypervigilance. You always feel on guard or on edge, difficulty sleeping, gastrointestinal issues like constipation, IBS, or hemorrhoids or ulcers. Your heart races, your appetite changes, you find it difficult to eat. Sweating, sweaty palms is also something of an indicator, especially if you're reminded of something that was traumatic. And self-medicating. And by that I mean self-medicating with food, drugs, or alcohol, or any substance to numb the physiological impact of the stress on your body. There are also common psychological impacts, avoiding, and we call that avoiding people, places, and things that remind you of the traumatic experience. having flashbacks or nightmares, even intrusive thoughts. What we see with people who've had something traumatic in their life or over their life, they try really hard to forget it. They try really hard to push it out of their mind. They don't want to remember it because in the remembering of it, all of those physiological responses that I just went over show up. So they want to push it away. They self-medicate, whatever. They push it out of their thoughts. Well, they have nightmares. They have bad dreams. They have intrusive thoughts. And so that's what we see as a psychological impact of trauma. Fear, anxiety, feeling depressed, anger, irritability, overreacting to minor situations, easily irritated, and negative beliefs about yourself and about the world, and self-blame and shame. And it's important to understand that these trauma reactions that I listed here are normal reactions to abnormal experiences. Meaning that, if you have experienced something that's traumatic and all of these things are showing up, that doesn't mean something is wrong with you, you're crazy. When I'm talking to my clients and I do this, I explain, we call it psychoeducation. I explain what trauma is, how trauma shows up. And I explain these common reactions. And there's like a sigh of relief that, oh, I'm not crazy. Oh, there's nothing wrong with me. And I say, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. The question is not about what's wrong with you. The question is about what's happened to you. And it's the things that have happened to you that has caused, that is showing up in your body and in your emotions. So the effects of trauma. So what we know about well, before I go into the effects of trauma, the types of trauma. So we know that a single blow, witnessing a car accident or a home fire or a robbery or experiencing a divorce or separation or the death of a loved one can be traumatic. There's also, we call those sort of single blows. There's also repeated traumas. They happen more than once, they keep happening. And then there's complex traumas. And so like war, conflict, community violence, and child abuse and victimization, and domestic violence. Those are forms of repeated and often complex traumas. It's important to understand that trauma is defined by the experience of the individual. Two people can have the same circumstances, the same experiences, but experience them very differently. And that can be due to what's happening in their environment, family and social supports in their lives, their childhood history of adverse experiences, and whether their experience was validated or invalidated. And the thing about validation and invalidation is important. Someone can experience something that to them is emotionally or physically harmful, but if they're told or led to believe it wasn't a big deal, you shouldn't be affected by that. That didn't affect me. Or told that, that happened in the past. That happened a long time ago. You need to get over it. That can feel really invalidating of their experience and can hinder their ability to fully recover from their traumatic experience. And this idea of validation and invalidation leads me to another form of trauma, which is racial trauma, which is gaining recognition as another distinct type of trauma experienced by African Americans as well as Indigenous and peoples of color in this country. So I think I provide, here you'll see just what racial trauma is sort of defined or looked at. And it refers to the emotional and psychological harm or distress caused by actual or perceived experiences of racism, discrimination, microaggressions, or hate crimes directed at people of color. And we know the effects of systemic racism on the physical, emotional, and mental health and well-being for African Americans and peoples of color. We look at, but especially African Americans, we look at the health disparities and the medical conditions for which African Americans are at a higher risk. These conditions are often linked to chronic stress. Now, at least in the mental health community, there's a willingness to acknowledge and recognize that systemic racism is a form of trauma that creates chronic stress and is toxic in Black and brown bodies. And so, the other thing about trauma, I mentioned single blow traumas, repeated traumas, complex traumas. When it comes to race, and those, when people have experienced a single blow trauma or even repeated traumas, the body and the mind has a capacity to recover. There's resiliency, and to be able to, those symptoms that I mentioned can subside. However, when it comes to racial trauma, these are daily, or systemic racism, these are daily occurrences that in which the body and the brain doesn't have a chance to fully recover from. If you are, the first at your job, or the only one, I should say, at your job, and you experience microaggressions on a regular basis, those are traumatizing. We sometimes refer to them as small T's. They're having an effect. Your body is seeing them, as your brain, I should say, is seeing it as a threat and triggering the fight and flight that I'll talk about. So that means it's a stress, it's a trauma. But if it keeps happening, those experiences or things you see on the TV, or even just I mentioned how stress can be internal, even the fears and the beliefs that you have about yourself, or the beliefs you have about what could happen to my children, what could happen to my family, those are all stressors that create toxic conditions in the body. And so what we also understand about trauma, sorry, here we go. Let me just go back one more time. What we also understand about trauma and the effects of trauma, just trauma in general, is that trauma changes how we understand the world and how we see the world, as well as how we see ourselves in the world. It affects our beliefs. It affects our beliefs about ourselves. It affects our beliefs about the world, including, our confidence and our self-esteem and our self-efficacy. Trauma interferes or interrupts our sense of control, our ability to feel like we can have control over our circumstances, our surroundings, or even our own bodies. And finally, trauma impacts our ability to connect with others, because we lose that sense of safety and trust and feel that we don't have control. And when it comes to those physiological and psychological effects of avoidance, hypervigilance, anger, fear, anxiety, when it's racial trauma, systemic racism, those same traumatic responses show up, that you always feel like you're on guard. You always feel like you have to watch your surroundings. You find yourself avoiding people, places, or things. I work, as I mentioned, in higher ed, and I'll talk to students, and whenever I hear a student tell me, especially a student of color, tell me they stopped going to class, or maybe they started off as a finance major and then they decided they didn't want to major in finance, or they started off as a pre-med major, but then they decided they didn't want to do that. Other people will think, okay, there's an academic reason. They can't do the work, it's too hard. For me, my mind goes to, what is that experience? What has your experiences been like in the classroom, in your program of study? Because we know that trauma produces this reaction of avoidance, because we don't want to feel those sensations and that impact in our body, so we avoid. And so students of color may avoid certain majors, certain classes, stop going to classes. Even as adults, we may avoid certain careers or avoid certain relocating to certain parts of the country, because there's this fear or this threat that, okay, I'm going to be putting myself in a place or situation that's going to trigger that stress response in our body. So now I'm going to talk about the brain. And what does the brain have to do with this? And we know that it's the brain's automatic natural stress response that has everything to do with the physiological and the psychological effects of trauma and chronic stress. So forgive me for my drawing here. I did the best that I could. So when we encounter a threat, the paper is due tomorrow, the workload, we have an assignment at work, we feel like an imposter. There's this thing called imposter syndrome. So we walk into the classroom or the conference room, or we hear our neighbors fighting loudly in the next apartment. Whichever it is, the amygdala perceives those as threats and triggers the release of the stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline to prepare our bodies for fight or flight. The amygdala doesn't differentiate or categorize the threat. That's not its job. Its function is to respond automatically and instinctively for survival. And this response is within seconds. So we look at the amygdala, or we consider the amygdala as the security guard of your body, or the security guard of the brain. The fight and flight response that's activated is the defense strategy. And the hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, are the weapons. And so when fight and flight is activated, what's also happening is that our prefrontal cortex, our thinking brain, goes on pause. It just goes offline. Again, all of this is happening within seconds. This explains why at times of stress, or we're reminded of something that's traumatic, or we call those triggers, we can't think as clearly. We can't really problem solve or figure things out in that moment. And that's because the defensive strategy, fight and flight, needs all the resources necessary for your protection. And those resources, as I said, are the adrenaline and the cortisol. So, when adrenaline is released, it makes our heart rate increase. It raises our blood pressure. Our lungs expand to take in more air so we can breathe. But our breathing becomes quicker and shallow because we want to take in that air, sending blood to the muscles. All of this is to give your body the energy and the resources to either fight or run away. Cortisol, the other stress hormone, is slowing down our metabolism. It's shutting down temporarily our immune system, as well as other functions like digestion. And so in moments of stress, we can find it difficult to eat. We may find ourselves constipated. That's because cortisol is like, okay, all these other things, you don't have time to eat. This is a threat. We need to focus on your survival. And so for people who've experienced stress or trauma or something traumatic, even the thought or reminder of the experience can trigger this fight and flight and the production of adrenaline and cortisol. Even the perception of a threat will cause the body to go into fight or flight and produce adrenaline and cortisol in your bloodstream to mobilize your body's defense system. Once the stress has passed, once it's over, your body stops the release and production of adrenaline and cortisol, and your body, the system, is able to regulate and return to homeostasis. Your heart rate and your blood pressure returns to normal. Your muscles relax. You're able to eat. You're able to move your bowels. You feel less tense. However, if you're chronically stressed because of burnout or or systemic racism that has produced a racial trauma, the body is not returning to balance or homeostasis. When you experience stress, your system is always elevated. There's an overload of these stress hormones, or adrenaline and cortisol. So your blood pressure remains elevated. Your heart it's always beating fast. You're not able to regulate. You find you're always tense. You don't take in as much oxygen for your brain. The overproduction of cortisol, your metabolism just keeps slowing down almost to the point where it shuts down. Other functions like your immune system and your digestive system, which slows down in normal stressful experiences, chronic stressful experiences, they don't function as well. So you find yourself prone to viruses and colds. You find yourself gaining weight. You find yourself breaking out. These are all what's happening when you're chronically stressed because of burnout or other traumas and your system is not regulating. For women in particular, their menstruation cycle becomes irregular. For all people, that overproduction of cortisol and adrenaline, your blood pressure remains elevated, as I said, your mood swings, you find it hard to sleep, and you find long-lasting digestive issues like ulcers and hemorrhoids. All of this is because these hormones are leading to toxicity in your body. And so what can you do about it? And that's what's important to talk about today. When it comes to burnout or racial trauma impacts, trauma in general, the key is noticing what's happening in your body, recognizing what's happening in your body, what's happening in your emotions, what's happening in your spirit, and doing something about it right away. You know, we often hear, listen to your body, pay attention to your body is telling you something. And I say, if your body is telling you something, if someone is telling you something, you pay attention, hopefully. If your body is telling you something, pay attention. When we are experiencing stress, burnout, we've had something traumatizing happening. You know, it's our body that registers it before our brain registers it. And it's your body that's going to tell you that you're stressed. So increasing your awareness, recognizing when something is a little off and not brushing it aside and saying, oh, it'll go away, oh, it'll get better. And, you know, perhaps it will, but maybe it doesn't. And even if it does go away or it doesn't, that you still need to pay attention to it. And so that's where self-care comes in. And so what do I mean when I say self-care? We keep hearing it all the time. There's no real universal definition of self-care, but it's widely viewed as activities and practices that we do regularly and intentionally to reduce stress and or may improve our overall health, our emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. Self-care is really about taking care of yourself in ways that help your body to regulate, in ways that bring relaxation, and in ways that are practical and work for you. So I'm gonna go through a few really important self-care practices. And even if we do have time, this particular self-care practice, deep breathing, I would like to practice with all of you today. Deep breathing is an essential self-care practice. When you breathe deeply, and when I say breathe deeply, I'm talking about breathing in through your stomach, or it's referred to as belly breathing or diaphragmatic breathing. When you're breathing in that way, you're activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our body's rest and digest system. You're activating that system to relax your body, to sort of bring homeostasis back into the body. Breathing in slowly, particularly when we're stressful or we're about to encounter something that's stressful or we're reminded of something that was traumatizing. When you breathe in slowly, this deep breathing, you're also triggering that prefrontal cortex to go back online. Remember I said that when we're in a stressful experience, we're not able to think clearly because that prefrontal cortex, again, has gone offline. When you breathe in deeply, you're basically you're sending a message to the prefrontal cortex, hey, go back online, start to think, start to rationalize, start to problem solve. Breathing in deeply also lowers your blood pressure and it slows down your heart rate. All really good things. Breathing deeply takes through the belly, takes practice. And when I'm doing breathing exercises with the clients that I work with, I tell them, don't get so caught up in the trying to get your belly to expand in and out. The most important thing is just to make sure that you breathing in slowly, inhaling slowly, and that when you exhale, your exhale is longer than the inhale. Because when you're exhaling, that's giving the parasympathetic nervous system the opportunity to activate, to rest and digest. I know this handout or this little image is a little small to read, but there is at the last slide some helpful resources and references, and this handout is included. So you can read it a little bit better, and then you can see all the benefits of deep breathing. Mindfulness is another self-care practice. We're hearing a lot about mindfulness lately, how mindfulness is so important to managing stress and improving our mental health and our physical well-being. So what is mindfulness? What do we say when we say mindfulness? Mindfulness is about purposely bringing your attention, focusing your attention in the present moment. Observing first and accepting situations, thoughts, emotions, without judgment. Meaning, thoughts, emotions that happen, that come to you, not trying to, not judging it, not trying to fix them, but just be aware of them and accept them. Mindfulness practice does focus in on deep breathing. And so that's a great way, when you're trying to be mindful, is to do that deep breathing. Other ways of bringing your attention to the present, to focusing, is using your senses, sensory awareness. And so, for students in particular, or for clients who, their thoughts are always racing. Their mind they have so many thoughts, their thoughts are going everywhere, and it causes anxiety and it causes stress, triggering fight and flight, because those racing thoughts are perceived as threats. I'll say, okay, let's practice some mindfulness. And so let's do some simple ones like sensory awareness. Notice what you see in the room. Tell me 5 things that you see in your surroundings. Tell me 4 things that you hear. Tell me 3 things that you can smell, 2 things you can taste, and 1 thing that you could feel. All of that is just bringing your attention to the present and bringing your attention away from the past that a traumatic memory has triggered, away from what happened yesterday that was so stressful. Bring it to the present. Another very important, and another thing to note is the mindfulness, the self-care tips I'm offering you today are all free. There's no cost, no charge, and you could do them at any time, or you could do them on your own. So sleep is such an important self-care practice. I could do a whole presentation on the importance of sleep and how sleep is so important to our brain's function, our bodily functions, our memory, our ability to learn. How when we're deprived of sleep, it's linked. When we're deprived of sleep, it increases our risk for chronic diseases, for viruses, increases our risk for colds and flus. So sleep hygiene is important. So, the CDC recommends that for those of you who are between the ages of 18 to 69, that you're getting at least 7 hours of sleep each night for optimal health and performance. That's the minimum, 7 hours. For those under 18, they need even more sleep, 9 hours and more or more. The other important piece of sleep is consistency in your waking and sleeping. So even on the weekends, you're going to sleep and you're waking up at the same time. Eliminating coffee and alcohol 4 to 6 hours before bed. Keeping your room cool and dark and quiet. That helps the production of melatonin and the I don't want to say suppression, but the regulation of cortisol, Because what cortisol does is, like I mentioned, cortisol gets you up, cortisol gets you moving, melatonin gets you drowsy, gets you sleepy. When the room is cool and dark, that stimulates melatonin production in your body. As well, the blue light. You hear it all the time, that blue light. That blue light is on your iPhone, your iPad, your Android, your TV. That blue light also interferes with the production of melatonin. And what blue light does is it actually stimulates cortisol. And so cutting that out is important to good sleep hygiene. Other practices, taking care of your body, diet and nutrition. I'm not a dietitian, but I'm sure all of you know the importance of eating healthy, cutting back on processed foods and increasing the reds and the greens and the blues in your diet. But it's also bringing awareness to your eating patterns. Do I eat more of this when I'm stressed? Do I tend to eat more of the fries and the donuts? Is that because I'm stressed? Cortisol has a lot to do with the appetite and the increase in our appetites when we're stressed. There's also something called the hangries that I bring up, and that's being hungry and angry. So when you're hungry, you may see that your mood declines. You become irritable and cranky. That's the hangries. And that's because your blood sugar level has dropped. And so, and bringing awareness and recognizing this. I didn't know I had the hangries, but I do. And I didn't know that until a coworker told me. And she would say to me, she'd ask me a question, I'll respond. And then her next question would be, did you eat today? And I would eat. And then she would ask me another question. And then she'll say, you know what, you're much better now. And I realized, okay, maybe I was a little snippy, or maybe I was a little curt because I hadn't eaten. And if the Snickers candy bars, they do this really funny commercials with celebrities like Betty White. And it's like, here, have a Snickers bar, because you're not you when you're hungry. And it's true, though I wouldn't encourage having a Snickers bar. Routine physical exams are crucial. You need to be seeing your doctor. You need to be getting those exams. Your doctors need to be asking you about your stress level. That should be the questions that they ask you. Regular exercise, get moving. Walking is great exercise. Dancing, before COVID, after a stressful week, we'd want to go dancing, go to the club or something like that. When you do that after a stressful week, you're getting that adrenaline and cortisol that has been overproducing in your body because of that stressful week. You're getting that out by dancing. Taking the stairs as much as possible is also crucial. And again, you want to just keep it simple and keep it practical. Connecting with others is crucial as well. All the researchers point out that when someone has gone through something that's traumatic, their ability to connect with family and friends is so important to their recovery. And so just connecting with people, but finding balance. When I work with college students, I have those students that all they do is study, it's class all day, exams, papers, that's all they do. They don't really engage socially. And then you have students that all they do is socialize. And so you want to find a balance, not leaning too much here or too much here. Recognize the givers and takers in your lives. I really think this is important. There are people in our lives, we all have them. They are drainers, they are takers. Some people even refer to them as toxic. Recognize them. They're in our lives, and for some of us, they have to be in our lives. We can't avoid them, but recognize them. And recognize, is that who you are? You are a taker, or you are draining. And also appreciate the givers in your life, the people who bring satisfaction, bring joy, help you to relax. Setting boundaries, learning how to say no. And it's not a matter of just saying no, it's learning how to say no in a way that doesn't put your boss or whoever, doesn't put them in a certain way, or your family, but it also maintains and preserves your dignity and your ability to cope and manage. Here's some other self-care tips. progressive muscle relaxation is an actual practice, and the handout that I provide, there's a script in how to do progressive muscle relaxation. So that's basically tensing, deliberately tensing a part of your body and then relaxing it so that you notice where tension is. Staying hydrated is so important. Water flushes out waste and toxins in your body. Don't hold it in. And by this, I mean, when you got to use the bathroom, use the bathroom. When you're holding it in, you are increasing tension in your body. And, notice how it feels when you get to the bathroom and you release, so letting, don't hold in things, don't hold in your emotions, and don't hold in when there are biological needs that need to be addressed. Brain dumps is something that I encourage, and that's if you have a lot of thoughts going on through your mind, just write them all down, put them on Post-it notes and just put them on the wall. And then you look at those thoughts objectively. And then you could say, you know what, I'm gonna take this Post-it down. I don't need to have these thoughts. So brain dumps, managing your time and monotasking, focusing on what brings you joy. And I say laughter, laugh as much as you can. When I'm in sessions with clients, I'll tell them a joke, and I'll say to them, or I'll say something really silly, like I'll talk about, why musicals, or why I hate musicals, or something like that. And they'll laugh. And then I'll say to them, what did it feel like to laugh in that moment? Because when you're laughing, you're activating the feel-good chemicals, the endorphins, you're activating that. That is a natural painkiller, and it also lowers your blood pressure. And get professional support if that's something that you need. There is no stigma. I can do a whole nother session on the need for professional support. Talking to professional enables you to get a different perspective on things that maybe your friends or your family can't give you. And professionals can help you connect the dots between the past and the present. So what's your self-care realistically? I'm just going to leave you with 2 questions, and this is the daily self-care challenge. Ask yourself, how am I taking care of myself today? So each day, ask yourself, how are you taking care of yourself? And plan. Sorry if I was muted during that. What I was saying is my daily self-care challenge is ask yourself, how am I taking care of myself today? And plan to do a minimum self-care practice each day. Keep it practical, keep it simple. Follow the advice of the flight attendant. Put your oxygen mask on first before trying to assist anyone else. These are the references that will be provided to you, and I want to just thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other. Okay, great. Okay. Sorry if I was muted. I hope I wasn't muted for most of the presentation. Okay, so we do have not a lot of time, but I definitely would love if there are any questions, comments that you would like.
I'll go first. I see some of the self-care. I see religion. Religion is not involved in your presentation, and I wanted to know why. Because I'll first state that especially people of color don't want to go, or usually are against going to professional support people, because they say God will take care of it. So I'd like to understand what you think about that.
So, so self-care is what is important and meaningful to you. There's so many self-care practices, and religion, faith, your practices of prayer, scripture reading, those are so important. And I didn't have a lot of time, but I wanted to talk about racial trauma and the Black community, and how for years, decades of this trauma, and yet we are a community, a group of people that are still surviving and thriving and resilient. And that resiliency comes from the importance of spiritual practices, the importance of the church, And so absolutely, spirituality is something that needs to be talked about a lot more. And when I do hear, God will take care of it, I'll say, yeah, God will take care of it. But, part of that is maybe you need to talk to a doctor. God's way of taking care of it, we don't dictate that. He tells us, and you know what, there's a lot of resources. And so if our spiritual practice is important to us, then by all means, but recognize that we live and breathe in a world where there are resources and people who can help us and can help us take care of ourselves.
Mrs. Walters asked part of my question about psychological education with communities that are not as open to therapy. But I also wonder about students. I work with the AnBryce scholars at Notre Dame who feel like they know all of the things, but they're avoiding actually doing these things. So how do you expose them to therapy that's not, I think you referred to it as single blow therapy, but how do you introduce the other levels of trauma and why you would need therapy?
So what I do with students is I just want to, I take a position of curiosity before I start saying, oh, you need this, or this is what you should have. And I want to hear from them, their experiences. Like I said, for people who've experienced trauma in particular, their unspoken question is, what's wrong with me? And so I bring it out in the open and I say, that's not the question. The question is not what's wrong with you. The question is what's happened to you. And so I take a position of curiosity. Talk to me about what's happened. Talk to me about what your experiences are like. And then I begin to connect dots for them by saying, how did that feel like for you? What was that like? That can be seen as a trauma. And, these are some of the impacts of trauma. And this is the benefits of seeing someone about that. And so, I recognize that for people who've gone through traumatic experiences, what's holding them back in some ways is this fear that there's something wrong with me, I'm damaged, and everyone will know it, everyone will see it, and then opportunities and chances will no longer be available for me. And I'd say, no, it's never about what's wrong with you, because it's not about what's wrong with you, it's about what's happened to you. I do see 2 hands up, so I do want to make sure that their questions get asked as well.
I think Jennifer was first and then Jackson.
Yes, I just wanted to tell you, thank you for the presentation and a reminder of all of these things. And I wanted to add a quote or a little saying that a friend of mine uses. We talk about the flight attendant one, but we also say an empty pitcher can't pour. And that was something that we talk about because, you have to pay attention to those things, like you said, so that you can stay full and available, not just for others, but for yourself. And if you're one of these type A people that serve, here's a reminder. You have to remember not to become so depleted that you can't do what you feel you're called to do. And your first duty is to take care of yourself. So again, thank you for the presentation.
And thank you. Thank you. I love that. You can't pour from an empty pitcher or an empty glass.
Right.
Hey, good morning. Thank you so much for your presentation. I guess my biggest question is, it's certainly cool for men to be vulnerable now. And I have a lot of friends reaching out to me with regards to seeking therapy. And the main question that I'm often asked is, what should I look for in a therapist? For me, I just say it's based on the individual and the fit. What were some suggestions you can give me so that I can give other people regarding who they should see or identify as a therapist?
That's really important, especially when there's so much hesitation and stigma around seeing a therapist. I think fit is so important. What's also important is comfort level. So the reality is, the first therapist you see, you may not connect with them, you may not click, and you may need to see another therapist, and that's okay. I say to my clients, I'm here for you. It's not about you here for me. I'm here for you. And so if we don't connect, then you are I'm certainly encourage you to find someone that you connect with. And so, and there's this thing about finding therapists of color, and I also think that's really important. But, you could have a therapist of color who doesn't share your background, and that there's not a connection and there's not a fit. And so it really is, as you said, it's about connection, it's about fit. It's about whether this therapist takes a position of curiosity. There's a lot about cultural competency, but I move away from cultural competency, because I don't think you could be competent in any one culture. And there's so many different cultures. So I look at cultural curiosity. Are they curious about your experiences, your life experiences? Or do they ask you questions about what it means for you to be a man, what it means for you to be a Black man? If they're not willing to go there with you, that could be an indicator. So those would be some suggestions that I offer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have any final questions before we end for today? No. Okay. Thank you, guys. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mrs. Walters.
I know you just came on and you just missed a lot of good.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My trainer this morning overruled me. Sorry, guys.
And in fact, you listened to what he said, his trainer. I was just getting ready to say the importance of exercise every day, whatever it is, walking, et cetera, please do that. And maybe you could tell a little bit about yourself real quickly, what you
Sure.
do. Okay.
Yeah. Good morning. So my name is Ikeno Kize, and I'm co-founder and CEO of a company called Somatis, which is a company that helps keep people's kidneys healthy. So we work with patients who have chronic kidney disease and end-stage kidney disease, which you may know is disproportionately impacting African Americans and other people of color. And so we go to health plans and health systems, and we ask them to delegate the risk of managing those patients to us. And then we find people in the community who will then get to know those patients really well: community health workers, nurse practitioners, RNs, pharmacists, renal dietitians. And then we go into the patient's homes and we essentially integrate care. And Mr. Welters is the chair of the board and helped me found this company. And so together we're basically trying to help vulnerable populations. And a lot of this comes down to some of what I just heard around lifestyle and taking care of yourself. There's some very well-known propagators of kidney disease, that's hypertension and blood glucose, poor diabetes management, particularly diabetes type 2. So that's what I do. And and I was planning on joining at 11, but then I was way behind in my workouts, and my trainer just said, "You've got to run." And so I did the run. So sorry about that, Mrs. Walters.
That was fine with me. I'm gonna do my run right after this. So
Okay.
Well, thankfully, hi, Ikena. This is Jay Thompson. I'm the executive director of the AnBryce Foundation. I will be connecting with you. So thankfully, we have recorded this. We are also going to be transitioning these to be available on MP3. So you'll be able to listen on your next run.
That's great. Awesome. That's great.
And maybe be a presenter also.
Absolutely. That's why I'm definitely going to.
Yeah, happy to.
I want to thank everyone for joining. This is our last session for the fall. This is also our inaugural program in terms of the Foundation Educational Series. And I just want to thank Ms. Temi Pedro for coming back again. She talked to us last year. No, it was this year. Why does everything before March feel like last year? It wasn't. It was actually in March. She talked to us about social media. and just our own engagement with that. So I want to thank her again for coming back. We will connect her with our scholars as well, particularly during their break. And if anyone on the call knows of anyone who may be either a great speaker or of interest, you can definitely reach out to myself. You can reach out to Jalicia. This is something that we consider to be vital to our entire AnBryce network and our community. And we want to ensure we are leveraging the time and space that we have to allocate resources and spread the wealth of knowledge and information across all of the people that we know and that we care about. I want to thank you guys again for showing up. We have our YouTube page. All of our sessions are on there. We will be sending out the MP4s, MP3s, so you can listen. So thank you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And
Take
thank
care.
you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a great rest of your Saturdays.
Thank you, Jalicia and Jay. Take
Thank
care.
you. Take
All right.
care.
Bye-bye.
That was awesome. I love this. I just wanted to stay on long enough.
Yeah. We can't hear you, Jay.
We're still recording.